Good evening, folks. It's great to see you all out here. My name is Jeff Groves. I'm the Dean of the Faculty at Harvey Mudd. It's wonderful to have such a large crowd for such a great event. I want to welcome you all to the Fall 2015 Michael Moody Mathematics Lecture. Michael Moody was an excellent faculty member and an excellent college citizen at Harvey Mudd, and he was especially a cherished friend, mentor, and inspiration to the Department of Mathematics here. Mike came to the college in 1994, and in 1996 he became Harvey Mudd College's first Diana and Kenneth Johnson Professor of Mathematics and was named Chair of the Department of Mathematics. During his time as department chair, from 1996 through 2002, the department hired 8 new professors, bringing the total number of mathematics faculty to 12. Mike wanted people who would bring a real passion to their work here, who would mesmerize and inspire students in the classroom. He gave the department what he called an animating goal, which was to be recognized as one of the very best undergraduate programs in the country. The department credits Mike as the guiding force leading to the reception in 2006 of the inaugural American Mathematical Society Award for an exemplary program or achievement in a mathematics department. That was a really big deal. HMC was singled out for this honor among all of the undergraduate and graduate mathematics departments in the entire nation. At the time of his death in January 2010, Mike was Vice President for Academic Affairs and founding Dean of the Faculty at Olin College in Massachusetts. That spring, the Harvey Mudd College Alumni Association recognized Mike as an honorary alumnus to commemorate his many contributions to the college. The Moody Lecture Series was established by the Mathematics Department to honor Mike's legacy at Harvey Mudd. It is supported by gifts from Mike's family, friends, colleagues, and former students. And we are particularly pleased tonight that sitting down here in the front row with us is Joni Moody, Mike's wife, and also a very special member of our community. Joni, please stand. And now, let me invite Lisette Devadoss, Chair of our Mathematics Department, to introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Jeff. Wow, great crowd. Good evening, everyone. Yeah. Okay, my students know that when I say hello to them, they say hello back, right? So, good evening. Good evening. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. As many of you know, I am Lisette Devadoss. I am the chair of the mathematics department. I am so delighted to be able to introduce tonight's speaker, but before I do, I want to thank a couple of people. Jocelyn Olds McSpadden, who is our administrator in our department, has set up all of this and has taken care of an enormous amount of details, and without her, this wouldn't be possible. So let's give her a round of applause. Now, I should say that there are many other people involved. I want to thank Andy Burnoff. Without his passion for establishing this series, it wouldn't be in place. And so thank you, Andy, and thank you, Joni, and really to all of you who have contributed, and thank you to all of you who have been here. Again, it wouldn't have happened without you. So more applause, please. Okay, finally, I'm going to introduce the star of our show tonight, Professor Satyan Devadoss. He draws geometric inspiration from theoretical physics, biology, art, and architecture, and is fascinated by how objects can deform and evolve. His research applies discrete and computational geometry to elucidate the structure of the world around us. He believes that conveying results with visual clarity, accuracy, and simplicity are as important as the discovery of the ideas themselves. Professor Devadoss is a mathematician, a professor at Williams College. We're very excited to have him here this year. He holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. We are so lucky that he is not only here tonight, but he is actually here for the year. And I think many of his students are in the audience and are already delighted that he is teaching for us this year. Am I right? Yeah. I'll say a few more things. He is an inaugural fellow of the American Mathematical Society, which is the primary professional mathematical society in the nation, and has received multiple teaching awards, including, most recently, the 2016 Deborah and Franklin Hyma Award for Distinguished Teaching from the Mathematics Association of America. His research ranges from cartography and origami to phylogenetics and art, attracting support from the National Science Foundation, the John Templeton Foundation, the Mellon Foundation, and the Department of Defense. In addition to invitations at Google, Pixar, and Lucasfilm, he's held visiting positions at Ohio State, UC Berkeley, and the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute at Stanford. Oh, and Stanford, sorry. In tonight's talk, which is entitled The Shape of Nature, Bee, Tree, Origami, Professor Devadoss will be our guide to the interfaces between art, architecture, and mathematics. So please join me in giving a warm and hearty welcome to Professor Devadoss.
It could go downhill from here, just to let you guys know. So a couple of things. First, it's an incredible honor to be here. I'm so excited. I have wanted to spend a year just at Mudd learning about how the school works, this amazing department, the students who go here, how it's different than Williams, right? How it's different than Pomona, how it's like many schools but different than many schools. So I've been having an awesome time with my kids, my students. It's been great. The second thing I wanted to say is never in my life have I worn a bow tie before. But I was given this honor of giving the Mike Moody lecture, and I looked at this picture and I said, oh my gosh, even if the talk sucks, at least I can honor the man in this one way. So, thought I'd do that. So my friends, for about 20 years, I've been struggling with the way math, art, and ideas of visual design fit together with analytical cerebral thought. Just as a kid, my dad is a math professor, and my mom is a botanist who draws all the time. So I've kind of grown up in both of these worlds, and how do they fit together? It's this question I've been wanting to ask for a long time, and let's take a look. Da Vinci, to me, Leonardo da Vinci is a great example of the blending of the worlds during the time of the Renaissance. Right? Let me give you a couple of snapshots. Right? The Mona Lisa, awesome. Works of art, clearly, if there's ever a work of art, there it is. If you ever go to the Louvre, I've been to the Louvre, there's a glass like 17 feet thick, right, in front of the Mona Lisa. You can't even see the thing. And then we have just his works on botany, right, the way the body works. And then we have his works on engineering and design and structure. Now, what is amazing about Da Vinci that I love is that he does not take one hat off before he puts on another one. Right? He doesn't say, now I'm done with the art part, I'm going to focus on the engineering part. Right? You could see, even in his works on design, you could see his artistic hand. And it's amazing, right? He's this one person who embodies all three at the same time, the blending of the worlds. So the question is, can we do that today? How can we reclaim this world of the blending of the worlds? You know, I'm teaching Math 60 at Mudd, multivariable calc. I love my students. I love being in front of them. And I see two sets of students. And there's a spectrum between it, but there's two sets of students. There's those who love equations and structure and design. They want to compute. They really enjoy it. On the other side, there are the students who love to draw and to visualize. And right, multivariable calc, calculus, which is the study of shape and change in several dimensions, struggles with both of these worlds at the same time. And I could see my students going through this. So let me give you this notion. Gauss-Bonnet theorem. Half the students in my class get turned on when they see this equation. And what it is, it's one of the most beautiful geometric visual theorems that exist. It's my favorite theorem in the world. What it says, the integral just means add up. So you're adding up the curviness of every point on the surface of the object, and that equals 2 pi times the Euler characteristic. And what that simply means is if I take an object and add up the curviness at every point, it's a fixed number. If I stretch the object, the little curviness at all those points are changing, but the total sum is always fixed. It's a remarkable result that you can write in this equation. But the other half of my students, when they look at this equation, they agree with Stephen Colbert when he says, equations are the devil's sentences. Right? So there's this natural pull in our world. Those who think visually, who love that kind of idea of describing shapes that way, and those who think algebraically or through structure. Take a look at this quote by John Littlewood. John Littlewood was a mathematician at the turn of the last century. He's a number theorist. And he puts the blame on this duality that we see actually on mathematicians. And here's what he writes. He writes, a heavy warning used to be given that pictures are not rigorous. This has never had its bluff called and has permanently frightened its victims. So in other words, we are training our own kids, the next generation, through mathematics to say, you know what, hey, that's a cute picture, but that's not a proof. Right? That's not enough. That's just an example. Real proofs come through equations, come through structure, come through some other algebraic formulation, but the picture isn't enough. And that's what John Littlewood was saying, is that picture itself is a type of notation. There's something beautiful to be thought about. Let me share with you this. These are 4 different pictures of 4-dimensional objects that I drew for my research. And here is my question to you. These are 4D polyhedra. You know a 3-dimensional object like a cube? This is a 4th-dimensional object pushed into 3D, and this is what it would look like. So let me show you this model. Right? I taught a class on modeling, on sculpture, and this is one of those objects. Now, it turns out that all 4 of them are the same. All it is I take this in 4 dimensions, I could push it in different ways and look at it at a different perspective, and I get those other ones. So they're all exactly, the 4 ideas are exactly the same. The 4 pictures are identical. You're just seeing it from different perspectives. So here's my question to you, my friends. What is the proof that all 4 are the same? That's the question. What's the proof? And here's the answer. The proof that all 4 of these are the same are right here. That's the proof. The picture is the proof. You don't need anything else. Now, the reason many of us don't believe that these are the same or struggle to believe that this is the proof is because when it comes down to looking at 4D pictures, we suck. And so you're not trained that way into thinking it. So you have to struggle with this. But on the other hand, there are lots of people who struggle with notation. There are lots of people who struggle with algebraic ideas. So how can we take these notions of visual design seriously in this world of math that I love? Here are a couple of snapshots of what people think the intersection of math and art could be. So let me take you back a little bit in time. This is the work of Piero della Francesca, an amazing work. It's called The Flagellation of Christ. This is one of the first works that took the notion of projections seriously. You can kind of see the lines of convergence on the floor. You can see the lines of convergence actually on the ceiling and the tiles. You can see, amazingly, lines of convergence and shadows on the bell on the top right corner. And all of these ideas were the first times kind of clearly defined by Piero della Francesca. So here's the question. Is this the intersection of math and art? Is this one place that Da Vinci can kind of begin to come back again? Is this one example of something? Let me give you something else. This is the work of Marcel Duchamp, Nude Descending a Staircase. And Duchamp is doing exactly what I did with my 4D little sketches, except he's showing the 4th dimension as time. And you can actually see this 3-dimensional woman. And you can actually see it because of the fact that the hand is layered above the body and the legs are layered over on top of each other. So there's just depth to it. But at the same time, that person is being smeared as they walk down as the 4th dimension is being captured in time. Is this the intersection of 4th dimension here of math and art? Is this a good example? Keep that in mind. Here's another one, Salvador Dali. It's called The Crucifixion. And here you see Christ hanging on this cross, except the cross is not a normal cross that you see. It's actually an unfolding of a 4-dimensional cube. So if you take a 3D cube that you get from Amazon and cut it and unfold it, you get a thing that looks like the box, which you can fold up again to get the cube. And what Dali did was he actually unfolded a 4th-dimensional cube. And he wanted to think of the notion of a 4th dimension in some terms of a physical or spiritual implication, so he brings in this Christ figure. So is this the intersection of art and math? Let me give you some more recent examples. This is Julie Merritt, one of my favorite artists. She's a MacArthur Genius Grant winner. This work of art doesn't do it justice. It's actually the size of this wall. It's incredibly enormous. And you can see in this work, it's called Stadia. It's actually, you can see sort of the same kind of movement as Nude Descending a Staircase. Right? You can see that 4th dimension. There's some kind of a stadium. There's movement. There are flags up there. is this an intersection of math and art when you're trying to express these complicated ideas? Or we can come home, right? Here we go. Our own president, right? Now, this is interesting to me because this itself isn't depicting mathematical notions, but the person who's doing it is. Right? Because she is a scientist, she is a mathematician, a computer scientist, an engineer, but at the same time she's an artist. So is this what it means to talk about the intersection of math and art? Not in terms of a piece, but in terms of a person. Is that the right way to go? Bertrand Russell, incredible mathematician, philosopher at the turn of the century, to me captured an idea that is a stumbling block of bringing these worlds together. And so John Littlewood, who I told you a little bit earlier, had a very clear perspective of how it fits into the math world. But if you pull back the lens, I think Bertrand Russell has this beautiful quote that captures it in the bigger picture. Here's what he says. Russell says, remote from human passions, remote even from the pitiful facts of nature, the generations have gradually created an ordered cosmos, math, where pure thought can dwell as in its natural home, and where one, at least, of our nobler impulses can escape from the dreary exile of the actual world. He's saying, the stuff that we have on us, this crap that's getting in the way, I can't wait to escape it. I can't wait to get away from it and be in pure thought. To him, Russell, mathematics was a Platonic notion, a state of absolute purity, and this stuff is actually getting in the way. In fact, he even calls this, for many of us who are scientists in biology, chemistry, physics, this notion of pitiful facts of nature. Right? Nature is actually a stumbling block into actually thinking about what pure thought could be. It's a pretty bold statement, but he captures in many ways this enlightenment notion of what we think purity of thought could be. Let me show you to me what this enlightenment notion is. So we talked about Da Vinci at the very beginning, right? The time of the Renaissance. So after the Renaissance era in the 1750s, the Enlightenment era comes. And first of all, let me just say, I love the Enlightenment era. Right? It is a time where everything has been pushed. Reason has been brought to the light to say that through reasoning alone can you take things seriously. You just can't say the sun is in the center of the solar system. Prove it to me. Show it to me. And the Enlightenment era has given me something I want really desperately, which I have, which is a job. Right? That's what it is, right? I'm a math teacher because of this. But let me show you how this has been pushed in a dangerous way. The Enlightenment era says you take math and art. And you can imagine on one side, the mathematician. Here are the descriptions. The cerebral one versus the artist who's physical. The mathematician who's rational, the artist who's emotional. You could imagine this, right? Here's a mud student. He's in the corner, working away. Very rational thinker and cerebral. Here's a kid from Pitzer, just emotional. Right? Just all over the place, doesn't really know how to put things together, but man, can they use their hands really well. There are these classical notions that we have. Who's the arch rival to the math major? The art major. We know this, right? We just have this in our hearts. Is this true? This is what the Enlightenment era has pushed us so far. In fact, it's even pushed us to say this. We can say those words we want to, but the parents are in the room, they know what I'm talking about. And that's the feeling, right? Oh, your son is an art major. Oh, that's great. That's great. How do we get over this? So I claim that these two worlds aren't that far apart as we think they are. I claim that there's a time to come back to the Renaissance once again. And I think the way to bridge these worlds together is through nature. In fact, this is exactly what Bertrand Russell pushed against, this notion of the pitiful facts of nature. So I'm going to give you a couple of pieces, and those words, bee, tree, origami, I just want to give you a snapshot of what that would look like through those things. So let's start with the bee. So the bee lives in the honeycomb, and one of the most amazingly silly results you would think are obvious, but it took 2,000 years to prove until very recently, literally about 10 or 15 years ago, is that the tiling of the plane using hexagons is the best way to do it. So if you use squares, it's kind of inefficient. Pentagons don't tile the plane that well. The hexagons, that's the best one. And the bee honeycombs are always hexagonal in nature. So somehow bees are efficient. Nature's telling us good things. And the question that people started asking is, that's great for the plane, but what about 3D? So let me ask you this question. What is the most efficient way to cut up space into equal volumes? So here are the rules of the game. You want to take space, cut it into equal volumes, and the amount of surface area that you use has to be the least possible so you can do it. All right, that's the rule of the game. So let me give you a snapshot of an answer. Here's one. Why don't you just cut it up into a bunch of cubes? Right, totally equal, everything is great. But if you think about it for a second, the corner of that cube right there has a lot of surface area meeting at that corner and not enough volume there. You're kind of wasting a lot of surface, a lot of junk is there, but very little volume. It's inefficient. It'll be nice to actually clip that corner, get a little less surface area, and maybe save that surface area for some other stuff that you could use on the sides. The person who thought of an answer to this is Lord Kelvin. He came up with this, which is basically a cube kind of clipped in the corners a little bit. This is called a Kelvin cell. Now, let me tell you something about Lord Kelvin. When Lord Kelvin spit on the ground, 50 people got together and said, that is the greatest spit I've ever seen in my life. Lord Kelvin dominated his era. People adored him. Everything he said was basically right. He was flawless. He's one of these great, rulers of the scientific world around that time. And he said, look, what about this as an object that does it? In fact, if you think about it a little bit, it actually tiles space exactly the way we want to. It's not as inefficient as the cube. That's really easy to check. It's better because of the corners are clipped. And in fact, if you were sort of inside that world, this is what the tiling would look like. This is what the Kelvin cell tiling looks like. It's beautiful. In fact, they're works of art, actually. This is work by Kubita Kazuka. This is actually, I believe, in São Paulo, in Brazil, where the tiling of this basketball court has exactly the Kelvin cell tiling on top. This is what it looks like from the inside. It's gorgeous. So is this the answer? For 125 years, nobody could come close to it. In fact, people didn't even consider this a problem because Lord Kelvin said so, right? So it's done. Until very recently. So here's the conjecture that Lord Kelvin made. Cutting up space into equal volumes using these Kelvin cells is the most efficient. And the recent phenomena happened just a handful of years ago. And it was done by Dennis Ware and his PhD student, Robert Phelan. And here's how they twisted the problem a little bit. They said, all right, we got the problem, but what if the piece that you're using to tile doesn't look so pretty? What if it actually looks a little bit uglier than you think it does? And here's their piece they came up with. Right? It's a bunch of things mushed together. You can see like a little dodecahedra, the 12-sided dice and all that stuff kind of put together in some funny way. But what's interesting about the way they configured it is that this actually tiles space. And when you actually computationally find out how efficient it is, it beats Lord Kelvin by 0.5%. It's amazing, but that's enough. That's enough to dethrone Kelvin. Now here's the catch. The catch is we still don't know whether this is the best. We know it's better than Kelvin, but we still don't know if it's the best or not. Now what's interesting is people believe that this is the best for one important reason. This shape, unlike the Kelvin cell, actually shows up in nature. And here's where it shows up. It's actually these caltrate structures that you see in tubes, actually in pipelines near the Arctic. And this piece is not from a math book. This is actually from a chemistry book. Right here, The Nature of the Chemical Bond by Linus Pauling. And I just want to bring this out for two reasons. One, Linus Pauling won 2 Nobel laureates, one for peace and one for chemistry. And 2, I'm named after Linus Pauling. My middle name is Linus. All right, great. But let me show you where else this thing comes up. Have you guys seen this at all? The Beijing Aquatic Center where Michael Phelps won every award possible? Actually, if you look at this, it's called the water cube as a nickname. This is actually the Ware-Phelan tiling. So if you actually walk inside it, this is what it looks like. And if you look up, this is what it looks like. What Beijing did, what China did, was they took the Ware-Phelan tiling and they said, listen, isn't this more efficient than any other things we have to tile? Which means the amount of beam structures we need to build and the amount of metal rods we need to use is going to be less for this object than for almost any other object. And it's an amazing scientific result. Let's build it. And they do it. It was remarkable, absolutely remarkable, a work of wonder, I think. Just a little piece of how actually nature, what Bertrand Russell didn't actually enjoy at all, he calls it the pitiful facts of nature, actually helps us in trying to mend these worlds together. So let me move on from the bee to the tree. So here's the tree. This is the evolutionary tree of life based on genetics, right? According to genetic information alone, if you just put it in some machine, this is one good guess of how we think life is working out, how we're related. So there we are, next to fungi, slime molds, right? That's our friendship group. And this classic notion of tree is very important. Now let me show you this paper in Nature, in this journal Nature that come up, which is one of my favorite papers to read. It's called The Phylogeny of the Canterbury Tales. And here's what they did. If you actually look at the authors, it's a remarkable group of authors. Adrian Barber, Christopher Howe, Department of Biochemistry. Sweet, we're cool with that, right? And then Norman Blake, Humanities Research Institute. Peter Robinson, Division of Learning Development, right? All these authors are from Britain. That's where their focus is, in Cambridge and Sheffield. And so here's what they did. They said, look, we have about 80 copies of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. And they're all different, all these copies. So they're all off just by a little bit from one another. And we don't know which one Chaucer actually wrote. Hey, it's okay, cool, don't worry about it. No, don't apologize. So which one Chaucer actually wrote? So here's the catch. How do you know which one Chaucer actually wrote? You can't use carbon dating. You can't actually use linguistic analysis. They're too close to one another. Here's what they did. They put it in a genome sequencing machine. All right? Except the genome was actually the words of Chaucer. The boy went to the store. Those were the DNA pieces. Put it into the machine, and it spits out this tree. So the vertices, those leaves at the outer ends, are actually the different works of Chaucer. Each different, each off just a little bit. And you could see, can you guys actually see all the purple ones have a branch away from that center? That means some error was done by the scribe, and that error was propagated to all the other manuscripts that were copied over time. And then there's a whole bunch of green ones and a bunch of black ones and a bunch of gray ones. But what the most interesting thing about the study was the red ones. People actually from the linguistic world never took these red manuscripts seriously. But these red manuscripts are the ones that happen to point right to the center of this tree. So there's a really good chance that these are great test samples to begin to look at Chaucer's original work, just from the DNA analysis of how far off the words are. I love it. Totally love it, right? Intersection of these worlds in terms of how you can use biological ideas in literature. This is a work that it's a painting that this artist named Owen Shu in San Francisco and I came up with, and it's now actually in a show in Berlin. And what we called it was the cartography of tree space. And the point of this painting is the following. Instead of looking at one tree, why don't you look at the space of all trees? Just like instead of looking at one number, why don't you look at the space of all numbers? If you look at the space of all numbers, you get the number line. If you get to look at the space of all pairs of numbers, you get the plane. So what happens if you look at all possible trees and every possible edge lengths, you get an incredibly beautiful, complicated structure. And what we wanted to do was struggle as a mathematician working with an artist to say, what would it feel like if you lived in this world? You know, if you lived on the number line, life's kind of boring, right? Because you just go back and forth. There's only one way to go. In fact, you can call your friends and say, I'm at 17. Oh, I'm at 12. I know exactly where you are. Nothing exciting. It's a one-dimensional world. What we did was we actually modeled the world structure based on the Tokyo subway system. And we came up with 3 paintings, and this is just one of them. And this one studied what it would look like if you took the subway inside this world. And each of those subway spots tell you about different tree structures. It's just an attempt to try to bring these worlds together. But let me show you something else. This is the work that I'm struggling with right now. It's a little shout out to my Math 60 students out there, which is the following thing. You know that if you're in calculus, everything is based on curves. But if you're in multivariable calculus, things become surfaces. So here's the question. You know, if you think about a tree, it's just a bunch of sticks. It's basically a bunch of curves glued together in funny ways. What happens if you take sheets and glue it together? And you get this tree structure. And these things, it's really simple to do. Take a glass of water and let it sit on your desk for 10 minutes and keep it absolutely still. Take a drop of ink, and this is what you get if you drop it in there. You actually get formations of tree structures that are not from points to lines, but actually sheets of ink that form. And it has a really deep implication to classical mechanics. So this is one of the things I'm studying about, but this comes exactly from the way nature works. What is the way in which all of these happen? Is there a way to bring these two worlds, of the visual structure and what we care about, into this world of structure in the math side? Let me now close in this origami part, right? And I want to wrap it up for us in a little bit, but let me show you this origami part. This is just a fern on how it folds and unfolds. You know, the way ferns fold and unfold, even the way plants fold and unfold, is exactly origami design. One of the things that happens in New England that I know is that in the springtime, which comes around May or June, when you're walking around, one day it looks completely like the trees are bare, and within a week, everything looks green. Right? It's not the slow transition time, and that's because the leaves have been curled up in certain origami foldings, and they're waiting for the right time to uncurl. See, if the leaves absorb too much photosynthesis early on when they're young, it's actually bad for them. And if they wait too late to start growing, they'll die. So you need to have it set up so that the solar panels come at the right time for them. And we're studying right now the structure of leaf folding. This is something I'm really interested in. In fact, I want to compare different leaves and find out the genetic notation of how they're related through genes and how they're related to the origami foldings. Here's something else, protein folding, one of the most difficult problems known to man right now. Right? You take proteins, they're folded in your body, it happens all the time, over and over and over again in the process, and if the folding happens a little bit incorrectly, if you get a kink, you get mad cow disease, and you get Alzheimer's. So if you can find out how little sticks fold, and the art of stick folding, you've solved the protein folding problem. And it is so computationally incredible that we can't do it through brute force. So we need geometry and topology and the study of shape, and better computational tools to do it. It's incredible. Here's something else that origami shows up. There was a student who was a medical student. She happened to visit the Origami Museum in Japan. Just for the heck of it, she was visiting some friends. She had a day to kill. She walked into the Origami Museum, and she realized that those tools that they show in the Origami Museum can actually be applied to exactly what she's studying with her advisor, namely stents. So a stent is something you put inside your artery, and you make it open up so the blood can flow once again. And what a goal of a stent is really simple. Put it in, make it small, pull it out, make it big. That's exactly what origami folding does. It completely controls size. So this thing becomes this thing. And now it's a $2 billion company that they have. Right? Based on this notion of just looking at origami foldings and the art of what stent design is. Here's something else that I'm absolutely excited with. This is the James Webb Space Telescope. It was supposed to be launched in 2015. Wait, that's now. Instead, it's going to be launched in 2018. It's got pushed by NASA. The size of this telescope is the size of a tennis court. So how do you launch a tennis court? You can't, right? So you fold it and you put it in a rocket. And so what you have to do is you have to fold it really carefully. You fold it too much and you lose the accuracy of the instrument that you have in space. You fold it too little, it doesn't fit into the rocket. So absolute origami design went into this thing. To me, this is the best way of talking about the intersection of math and art is the work of Eric and Martin Demain. So Eric Demain, 19 years old, he gets a PhD from the University of Waterloo. Solves a problem nobody could solve for about 50 or 70 years. As a 19-year-old PhD thesis, MIT calls him up. He's a computer scientist. MIT says, we have a job for you. Eric's like, that's great, but I think I have to turn it down. And MIT says, are you serious? Like, what? Where do you want to work? I mean, this is exactly the stuff you're doing. It's one of the best departments in the world. He says, well, I'm going to paraphrase this, but roughly he says, my dad's looking for a job. Oh, really? What does your dad do? Is he a computer scientist? Well, he's like a glass blower. And so MIT builds his dad a glass blowing studio 2 floors below from his office. Together, they've written about 250 papers. Eric won the MacArthur Genius Grant, I think, when he was 24. MIT is not a stupid place. They know what they're doing. And what this is their struggle with what happens when origami has curvature. Almost everything we've dealt with today in terms of folding and unfolding has to do with flat pieces of paper. But origami, actually David Huffman from the Huffman Codes was one of the more premier founders of how origami can have curvature in it. And this is untapped. I mean, 1 paper, maybe 2 papers written in this entire field of things in curvature. This is some pieces they came up with. This is in the permanent collection in the Museum of Modern Art in MoMA. It's amazing. This is something that my students did for me. I taught a course on origami last year. It was an amazing course. And I told them, look, you can't actually take a class on theoretical mathematical folding without folding things. So I made them make pop-up books for me using the theory that they learned. So they went to the museum, the Williams College Museum, and they were forced to make pop-up books. And it was an incredible experience. And to me, I just want to say, my friends, you know in MUD the importance of actually being in the lab, doing these physical things. And I encourage you to keep going that way. Let me go back to this thing again. We talked about the world of math and the world of art, cerebral, rational, physical, emotional. Let me tell you actually the last line about the job and the unemployment that I want to talk about. Let me show you this one picture. This is from Williams. I taught a course on genetics at Williams. And one of the projects one of my students wanted to work on is use genetic ideas, not for Chaucer, but actually for data from Williams. So I guess it's called data science now. Right? But the idea is we took alum data 15,000 or about 16,000 alums. We got the data from Williams. They gave it to us. And I wanted to know, my students and my pair of students and I wanted to know, which majors result in which careers? Right? Is there really a correlation between math and awesomeness and art and unemployment, right? Like that is sort of the enlightenment push that many of us have been feeling and thinking about. So here's what we found out. This is the picture. Let me just be clear about what this picture is. The left side of the picture, it took the majors at Williams and broke it up into 15 big groups. So you have econ, poli-sci, history, cultural studies, that's Africana studies, Asian studies, all that stuff. English and literature, art, music, and those are the 15 groups on the left. And the 15 groups on the right are the 15 main careers. Right? Grouped in the ways we thought were reasonable. College education, health and medicine, K through 12 education, consulting, government, social services, entertainment. And here's what the alum data showed us. So if you, for example, are an English or lit major, that's where your career takes you, which is basically anywhere. Right? So you see that English and lit aren't just landing in the writing communication section. They're landing everywhere. And so here's what a history does. It takes you everywhere. Now notice it's a little bit thicker for the law piece, which just makes sense because it's a little bit self-selecting, right? Those students who want to go there might actually pick history a little. Here's econ, a little bit more in the banking financial, which makes sense, but those guys are going everywhere. This is from the other side. If you want to do sales, they take anyone. Banking and finance for the same reason. Here's college education, pulls it from everywhere. So I think there's this actual myth that if you are going to be an art major, you have to be an artist. Right? The goal of a college is to equip you to think, to write, to speak clearly in the discipline that you love. And you should be able to use that across the board. Now, I will tell you one outlier. Here's the picture. There's only one main outlier, which is chemistry and biology. If you're bio and chem, there's a huge push towards the health med sector than any other spot. And that makes sense because the only way to go into medicine is to do pre-med, which means you're already being focused intensely on biology and chemistry. Unlike law, which doesn't have a particular major, you just need to take the LSATs to get in. So let me rephrase what this should be. Let me tell you my way of thinking about this. Here's math and art. It's not cerebral and physical, rational, or emotional. Here's what I think it is. Math actually deals with clarity, and art deals with maturity. Have you ever heard, can you imagine in your mind's eye a 10-year-old chess prodigy? You can do that, right? Can you imagine in your mind's eye a 10-year-old mathematical genius? You can imagine that, right? Somebody who can just think deeply. He's, Eric Demain at the age of 19, crushing things, right? This guy, there's something out there. Can you imagine in your mind's eye a 10-year-old musician? Sure, Beethoven, all the great ones were young and composing incredibly. Can you imagine in your mind's eye a 10-year-old literary critic? A 10-year-old historian, a 10-year-old artist. I don't know, Picasso. If you think about the great artists, we know what they did when they died, but nobody kept their 5-year-old sketches. Because a lot of this thing has to do with maturity, right? This is why I think there's an incredible divide between math and stat. Mathematics doesn't have to do with maturity. You just need to learn the weapons. And in statistics, you have to understand the data. And to understand and start with the data, you have to be mature. You need to understand what those things mean in a global sense. And so when we walk the spectrum between math and art, and my friends, you guys know exactly what that spectrum is, right? Over here is math, and next to it is physics. Next to that is chem and bio. CS is sort of over there too, right? And then you're sort of in the econ world, walking history, poli-sci, right? And then you're like in the languages, music, art. You know exactly what that spectrum is. And that's the notion, right? It has not to do with the difficulty or the intensity, but actually a sense of maturity. Math deals with clean things. The fish is already gutted and washed. Let me push this again. Math deals with sterile, and the art deals with the raw. Let me give you an example of this. This is a book by Charles Taylor called The Secular Age. Charles Taylor is one of the preeminent philosophers. He's a Canadian superstar. Won amazing awards for this thing. I think it was in 2006 or 2007. It is the hardest book I have ever read in my life. 900 pages. I cried every day. I was in a reading group, which I absolutely regret at that time being in, and he spends 200 pages out of 900 pages defining the word secular. And I'm thinking, I know hard math definitions. I mean, I've seen hard things in my life. Never has it taken, I mean, if you think about like algebraic variety, toric, cohomology, like this would take a few pages, you could kind of, a group structure, but 200, I mean, what is so hard about this? And that's the punchline, you see, because we are dealing with clean things. I make up my own clean world, and they are dealing with humanity. So an artist is actually dealing with definitions that doesn't even have things to define yet, right? They're at the edge. And how do you mix these worlds together? So we have to be careful how to separate these things. So let me close with 3 professors who I encourage you as MUD students to think about. All of these professors are in the HSA department. And I think this is a great place to start to push your scientific endeavors. I think science doesn't start and land in science. If you just think about the work of the Canterbury Tales, it works and plays in so many different ways. So I just met Chrissy Spackman just a few weeks ago. She's visiting for a couple of years. I love the kind of stuff she does. Here's the course she's teaching, Where Food Comes From. Right? She's teaching it this fall. And she's actually struggling with the notion of design and style and taste of food from the consumer perspective and from the producer's perspective. I could imagine 1,000 brilliant math questions you could ask on structure, all from this kind of course. I encourage you guys to think about this. Here's something else. Sal Plasencia, he is new faculty hired at MUD. Here's the course he's teaching, The Novel as Print Technology. Now, this is one of the books he's using for this class. There's a person named Chris Ware, one of my favorite comic book artists ever. The only thing bad about Chris Ware is you could only reach 3 of his pages at a time before you get extremely depressed. Have you ever read Tintin, the work of Hergé? It's exactly like that, except depressing. So you flip the pages and you go, this is gorgeous, and by the 3rd page, you have to put it down. This is Chris Ware's response to the iPad. About 5 years ago, before you guys were born, what happened was that people thought everything was going to be digital, right? That was the next revolution. Amazon's going to lose out. They have to make the Kindle, or, they're going to, everybody's worried about the notion of the physical. It's going to be digital. And then Chris Ware thought about this and he goes, no, there is something amazing about physical things. Let's take it seriously. And here's what he did. He built a comic book, which was a box of books. And in that box, you got a newspaper. In that box, you got one of those golden books. I'm not sure if people older, my age in the audience knows those little golden books you got when you were kids. There was a book that looked just like a golden book in that box. You got a map in that box. You got classic books in that box. You got all of these different styles of books in the box. And here's what each one of those was about. Each one was a story about a person living in a building. It was the same building, except the story takes place at different times. So maybe the newspaper had the story, and there's a little girl in that story. That little girl is an old woman in a very different story. And he doesn't tell you the order to read it. He doesn't tell you which way to do it. And the book is called Building Stories. It's an amazing response to this linear way of thinking about it. I love it. I love this approach. I want you guys to take this seriously and take those ideas you get from it. This is Jeff Groves. He has this class he's been teaching. Actually went to his studio, and I kind of bugged him about this. He has this workshop on hand-press printing. Incredible stuff, right? And what he does is he, along with the other 2 faculty I've told you about, do not cut the distinction between research and teaching separately. Here's what they say. The stuff they're working on as researchers is exactly the stuff you're going to get in class. So what Jeff deals with is things of how objects are printed, physically printed using a press. And actually his work on literature deals with a history of how those things were done. I love this idea that you actually tackle it seriously. Tackle the physical, the notion of what you can touch in your hand seriously. One of the dreams that I've had for years and years is that I have been extremely jealous of the other scientists. Biologists, they have labs. If somebody says a biolab, you know exactly what that means. Chemists have labs. Physicists have labs. Even computer scientists, they have labs. Let's go to the CS lab, right? Now, how many times have you heard of the notion of a math lab? Oh, are you going to the math lab? Let's do it. Now, there are people who do applied math who sort of need that kind of, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about everyday, old school mathematicians doing theoretical stuff, nothing applied. And why can't we have a lab? So this notion kind of frustrated me because it goes back to the thing of enlightenment, that we actually don't take the physical seriously because mathematics, dude, you are in the esoterical realm of the fuzz. right? You don't deal with nature. That's not what Russell says. You're escaping all this stuff. You don't need that. You just need you don't even need a board. Just sit back. You don't even need an office. One thing I love about Mike Moody that I was talking to Francis Su for a while, and I asked him, tell me about this man that I'm representing in some sense, talking about. And Francis said, Mike has always wanted that. It's one of the dreams that he's had. It was a place that you can actually go and have a space, a physical space, where students can go and interact with objects. And I would say just to push it more, not just as a teaching space, right, but as a space research gets done, serious, incredible research gets done. And you know what, my friends? We are doubling down on the notion of the physical in this space. Right? At the 5 colleges, what we've decided to do is to say that MOOC learning, massive online learning, is not the way to go. What really matters is having dinner with somebody, with your professors. What really matters is going to their office and sitting and laughing. What really matters is the notion of the physical in the labs. And I encourage us to think about what that math lab would look like. And one place to turn to might be this new center of creativity the 5 colleges have announced. Is that a natural place where mathematicians can go and hang out? Where we can think about those ideas in a physical way and interact with linguists and historians and sociologists. So let me close by saying, how do we do this? How do we bring the Renaissance back together again? I'm going to close with a line from The Princess Bride. How do we pull this off? Here's the way we do it. Life is pain. Anyone that says different is selling something. There is no magic bullet. It goes by going, shaking somebody's hand, getting to know them, understanding them, and listening to what they have to offer. Do not think math is above any other discipline. It is one of them. Thank you for your time. Yeah, please. If you guys have any questions for Maria.
We can take a couple of questions for Professor Devadoss.
Okay, so that was awesome. But math is not sterile. It's alive. It glows. It transforms.
That's true. That's true. So, everything I say is in some kind of context. And what I mean by the word sterile is the fact that the objects we're sometimes dealing with are our own creations, right? When I say an abelian group, let me give you one example. One of the things that happens at Williams is the faculty get together, the science faculty get together for lunch. Every Tuesday, all the science faculty get together for lunch. And we use our sort of NSF grant money to pay for our lunch. No big deal. It's great. Now, what's interesting is that we can all get up, talk about it. We spend an hour doing this, but 20 minutes is sitting and talking, and the other 20 minutes, one of us gets up and talks about our work. They tried the same idea across the different disciplines at Williams. They tried it in the history, econ departments. It failed. They tried it in the humanities department and failed. And I'll tell you why. Because the stuff that a historian and the stuff that a literary scholar actually deals with is actually more related to their identity more than mathematics. So what I mean by that is if I'm talking about an abelian group and one of my colleagues finds an error in my proof, I will feel a little stupid. But I'll feel thankful for finding the error. And my identity that day as a human won't be shattered. Because I am separate from the notion of an abelian group. If on the other hand, I as an artist, right, I as a musician, I, as somebody who thinks Abraham Lincoln did something in a certain way, have written about that. And if somebody finds that to be incorrect, then you are actually getting to the core of who I am and how I'm expressing it. So I'm not saying that there's not a relationship between that. I'm just saying in general, it's harder to do that because the person is invested in the notion of the humanity, more in certain disciplines than in others. I'm not saying as a mathematician you're not, but I believe that the kind of stuff you're dealing with is more invested that way.
Other questions? Well, I would like to invite all of us to go out to the, what is it called, the Shanahan Courtyard. But before we do that, We have a small gift for you, and I've been asked to encourage you to open it now. So,
All right. Sweet. All right. Cool. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you again for a wonderful lecture. Please go out and enjoy desserts, and let's give one more round of applause for Professor Devadoss.